Alright, so today I'm going to be talking about why genetic editing is harmful to the human race. So some of you may know about genetic editing, but I'll be here to explain it to you guys today. Um, have you guys ever dreamt that one day you could watch your child be a famous basketball star, maybe a famous track athlete, or maybe even just be really intelligent, or even just carry the genetic traits that you have to look just like you? So these types of ideas are all becoming possible with gene editing and gene therapy. But I believe that this can directly oppose how God's made us in His image. And some other issues that I'm going to be talking about is decreasing diversity. It can increase the possibility of mutation. It can create a monopoly, and we can also be trying to play God. But I'll explain all of that in a little bit. So to start off, what is genetic editing? So according to the National Human Genome Research Institute, genetic editing is a process that lets scientists change the genetic makeup of all sorts of living organisms. So in this case, we're going to be talking about zygotes, which are fertilized egg cells, which have been more like, that's what people have been doing, and like that's how it's been used, the first time it's been used on a set of twins in China. So I'll explain that also a little bit. So another important topic is to talk about eugenics. So we talked about it a little bit in this class, but it's a practice that has been used all over the world beginning around the 19th century. So an example would be in Sparta, the women that were strong and healthy were expected to have many children, while the women who were produced weak and inferior were killed with their offspring. So this practice was used to attempt to create the so-called perfect human race. A couple of other methods that have been used in history are regulating the offspring of biracial couples, compulsory sterilization, so not having, like, taking away the ability to have children, even forced abortions, which has been used. So we all know that these are extremely wrong, but and I'm going to go into what the Bible says about this. So we have to ask ourselves what we believe. So what we believe about the Bible is true. So if we believe what the Bible is true, and this is important to us, then we can listen to the Word. But I can say all we, but you have to keep in mind what you believe. So in Psalm 139, 13 through 14, it says, "For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows them very well." So if God, who's perfect and knows everything, took time to make us exactly the way that we were made to be, then why should we change it? That's some of my argument. And so God's got a plan for us, and He wants us to achieve His plan. So if we are using the processes of eugenics, aren't we going against what the Lord has made us to be? So now I'm going to explain genetic editing. So here's a picture. So there's been in a lab, they produce these things called CRISPR cells. So they go by known as genetic scissors. So they can change the genetic makeup of animals, plants, and now even humans. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a strand of DNA, and then they're going to go in with these CRISPR cells and cut the DNA in half and take away the part that they want to change. So that could be, eye color, hair color, even height, like all these types of things that they're learning how to do. So you'll take that piece out, and then they'll take the type of DNA that they've made in the lab and insert it back into that strand. And it's pretty creepy, but that's how it works. So then I have to go to the positives. So I'm obviously against it in my presentation, but I have to go to the positives before I explain the negatives. So one positive could eliminate a lot of diseases. So it's been used on one set of twins in China, like I said, and what they did was take away the genetic disease of AIDS in their family, which obviously is really helpful. So that's one reason, and it also has the possibility of taking away hundreds of different types of diseases with this type of treatment. Another one is curing areas of pain and or anxiety. So let's say you have, for some reason you hate that you have, I don't know, I can't really think of an example, like blonde hair or brown hair, and you want another type, or you're insecure about, maybe you have, I don't know, anything that you can be insecure about, you'll be able to take away. So maybe, a stupid example, but you have massive feet. you could go in and just be like, well, I'm going to take away that. But so that's could be also a positive. Another one is increasing human intelligence. They've also shown that you can go in and just do all these types of treatment. I mean, there's unlimited possibilities with this. So now I'm going to be going into the negatives. So the first one that I have is the possible side effects. So first, we don't know what kind of effect this will have on those twins. So there could be all kinds of side effects for multiple generations to come. So that's also an issue you don't have. And also you're going into a fertilized egg, something that's not fully developed, and trying to change the genetic makeup, which can have a lot of side effects. And if you mess up, like, you can imagine how much that can affect a person's life. So, and also, if we're saying, a lot of our culture now is saying that, you can't change if I don't have a say. So if you're changing it in like a fertilized egg, like, that's going to be a human one day, and they don't have a say in that. Like, so that could be another issue. Another one is genetic diversity, which is the polygenic traits. So polygenic traits are genes that control multiple different human traits, and so you can eradicate all these types of diseases, but also genes aren't just linked to one specific thing. They're linked to all kinds of other things. So if you change one thing, then you have a high possibility of changing something that you're not trying to make better. So another thing is human happiness. So you can't make, one of my arguments is that you can't make humans happy by simply changing a physical or emotional like type of thing. So people are always wanting more in life. So if you change the height, then they're going to be happy for a little bit, but then they're going to want more and more. So another quote that I found was from the movies Incredibles, and it says, when everyone's super, no one will be. So if everyone's just starting to make themselves the best type of human, then everyone's just going to have that, and it's just not going to be super. So, and then another reason is, are we playing God? So if God is making us in His image, then if we're trying to change how we're supposed to be, aren't we trying to take the place of God? So that's an argument. And then a verse that I have is Jeremiah 29:11. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and to give you hope in the future." So He's a plan for your life, and if you're trying to play God and change the way you're supposed to be, I agree. I think that directly opposes the Bible. So another example that I have is like, you don't want to, another reason why you don't want to change it, even if it could help, is like, I have a personal story. So, for example, some of y'all know about this, but my mom got diagnosed with breast cancer this summer, which obviously is a really bad disease, but as she got diagnosed with that, I was actually on a mission trip in the Dominican Republic, and she got, like, I heard one night, and I wasn't even with my family, so I was, struggling with that, obviously, and all this kind of stuff, but then I was praying for God to give me peace, because it was in the middle of the mission trip, and I still had, like, 4 or 5 days left to go. And so the next day, I felt like I prayed for peace, and I felt that God gave me a sense of peace. And so as I was walking around, like, people could tell that, and, like, if you got told that your mom had diagnosed with breast cancer, you wouldn't expect them to be, like, like, in a good mood, or, like, going around and being able to, like, help these kids or run the vacation Bible schools. But I had a specific individual come up to me and, like, say that they heard about what happened to my mom and were, like, crying all night. And then they saw the sense of peace that God gave me, and they were like, that can't happen just, like, regular. Like, that's not a real thing. And so they decided to give their life to God that night. And so that was just something that's, like, God gives, like, specific situations that, like, might seem bad, and, like, they are bad. Like, my mom had to go through chemotherapy, and she's cancer-free, praise God now. But, like, God is really all kinds of ways that He works. So, and then another negative is family genetic questions. So I kind of talked about this earlier, but if you have, you change let's say I have a son, and I change him to be, 6'5", brown hair, and he comes to me one day and he's like, "Dad, why don't I look like you?" And I have to tell him, well, I wasn't happy with myself, so I had to change the way that you look. So, obviously that's an issue. And then my last negative that I have is money. So it could create a monopoly, like I talked about. So, like, if only wealthy people can afford this type of treatment, then they would have the top humans, and then that create even more of, like, a segregation between, like, classes. So that's another negative. And then quote that I have is, "What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil." So, if first we're trying to eradicate all types of diseases, like that's a really good, like I think everyone in this class would agree that that's a good effect of genetic editing. But we can all agree that once it just keeps going and people want more and more, like we can't really handle our own desires, and so we just want to do more and more. Eventually, changing all these types of characteristics. So, my last thoughts are just saying that genetic editing is currently illegal in the United States, but people are trying to get this legalized. It did happen in China, but that was a lawsuit against him, and now he's in jail for the rest of his life. But who knows where this will come to. And then just final, is it worth the physical, emotional, and spiritual damage that this might cause? And so we have to keep in mind that this treatment is not sinful in itself, but it can cause sin problems worldwide. So I'm done.
I'll open it up. Mrs. Bowers, you got anything for us?
Good job. Do you feel like, in your research, the scientific community is more in favor of this or more against?
So I would say, of course, there's people that think different ways, but a lot of them are pretty protective of medicine and like trying new procedures. So there has to be all sorts of tests. I'm finding that in other countries such as China, they're pushing it out a lot more heavily than the U.S. So I don't necessarily know where that will go. I don't know the future, but I think that it definitely could happen. I mean, people are already pushing for it and trying to say, just like try to change little things. So right now they're changing it in monkeys right now, and like I think like rats. So just like little things, but that's the process they have to take. So.
I just think I don't know if this is something like it's no question. It's interesting that we live in, at least in America, a country that celebrates and encourages diversity, and this very much conflicts with that, like you pointed out, like, we can't want to genetically mutate people to make them, to only bring out what we are deeming good qualities.
Mm-hmm.
We want, that this is very contradictory to this culture of, accepting people how they are. But then in China, they don't celebrate diversity as much, so that makes sense that would be a heavier push there.
Yeah.
It just that came to my mind.
I think it was it Cole or we were talking about some way was it in how in China there's like 3 different, I think it was yours in like Russian, Ukraine, something like that. Maybe not, but anyways, how China has like there actually is like 3 different diversities in China.
There's a bunch of different
Or ethnic groups, yeah.
Just how there's different ethnic, not everybody's not the same.
Right, and they don't like
But yeah,
agree with.
they
Sure.
have a lot.
The way that the society has functioned for thousands of years is trying to constantly homogenize itself. So it's like it does make sense thinking like would they be more okay with gene editing in this in that context?
That's what I found.
So I got a couple of questions just for one for clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Is I know with any type of new technology, there's like what we hope we will be able to do and what we can currently do, right? As it stands right now, is this something that, like you mentioned the big feet thing, like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So is this a technology where if my feet are too big, then I can get this procedure done and my feet, or is this a generational thing where I hope that my kids don't have the thing that I have?
Yeah, so it's gonna be happening like a zygote, which I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So really early on, like right, in the beginning stages. So you're gonna have to change it, in a lab with all these types of technology with the CRISPR cells, which are super microscopic. So you're not gonna be able to change that in a human that's
Right. And so that connects with what you said about a choice in the matter, whether or not.
Right.
Okay, so that leads us to the next question. Do you see a line? It seems like there might be a line where on one extreme we're talking about, like the designer baby thing that we talked about in class. Like if I'm trying to change the genetics of my kids to have the right eye color, I say my preferred eye color, versus I have this genetic predisposition to cancer that I would love for my kids to not have to worry about.
Mhm.
It seems like we'd be super against this extreme over here, super for this extreme over here. The problem is most situations are gonna be like somewhere in between those, right? So do you see anywhere where there's a clear line that maybe like some sort of regulation, you know, when you mentioned the twins with AIDS, like if there's a really high chance that these babies are going to have, you know, AIDS is just one of those things that just gets passed on,
Right.
you know, and so if we could prevent that, that seems really desirable. I'd love to see that happen. But again, where is that line? But is there some sort of regulatory line that we can say, here's where this technology is good, here's where this technology is bad?
Well, there's not a line right now, honestly, but I would, I'd want to think they'll have really strong restrictions in the future as it develops, but yeah, that's a fine line. I mean, people would say it's diseases, and then you'd have people coming out and saying, well, my massive feet are a disease,
Right.
and like, that's affect my life because the way that I walk isn't the way that I want to, or I've been made fun of all my life because I have blonde hair, so that's sort of a disease against me, so it's really hard to draw that line.
Right. Good answer. And classmates, you got anything for Isaac?
So if you're doing the DNA splicing or whatever that is, you said you're doing that at the very beginning stages of like the pregnancy, like the actual baby being formed?
Yeah,
Is that what
so
you're
I don't know the exact word. What's when the sperm and the egg come together? What's like stage is that called?
Zygote.
But like, what is it before it starts like developing into an actual
Embryo.
human? Embryo. Yeah.
After zygote.
So it has to be before the embryo. So it's got to be like.
So it's like literally right when they come
Yeah, and I did research. They also did these with the rats.
Yeah.
They had a sperm and an egg cell. They combined them themselves and then edited it. So it's got to be right at the beginning instead of.
So if Mr. Satterfield wanted to get big feet out of his family or whatever, if he did that for his son, for like, she got pregnant or whatever, then the sibling, if you didn't do that DNA splicing, is still gonna have big feet.
Yeah.
What about how does
Third
that
generation?
carry on? Do they have any research on how it actually keeps going? Like what's his son? Is his son's gonna have small feet?
But
What
his
does that
son,
do to his son,
yeah.
and his son, and his son.
So
Generation.
they haven't obviously had that effect on
Yeah.
living things, but what we know from DNA that if you are changing the genetic makeup, like that's forever in them. So when you have that goes into reproduction, actually, because you're not changing the reproductive cells. I couldn't give you a good answer on that. I think if you're changing them, that it.
Then it would have to have somewhat of an effect.
Yeah, I think it would if you're changing the genetic makeup.
Yeah.
And
So, sorry for the rest of you that we're kind of geeking out on this stuff. So what scientists have discovered, so all of this technology is dependent on if genetic replication continues to happen the way we expect it to happen. The difficulty is we're doing that with the assumption that we're messing with genetics early on, and then we have to assume if it keeps happening. The CRISPR technology, the revolution that this provides is that we have the ability to do something to genes without just killing the being. Because every time we tried to do something like this before, it just, whether it's bacteria, I mean, we started this stuff with bacteria, and then now we're doing it with rats, and so on. So it's like the fact that these rats that we've made this procedure happen this early, right, in fertilization, the fact that those are becoming mature rats, that in and of itself is a success. So what happens the next generation, the following generation, that hasn't even been discussed at this point. Which is why, he talked about it more in his paper, but this Chinese biologist that he performed this procedure, we're not clear if, like as far as the news goes, we're not clear if the parents even knew.
they kind of shut it down.
Yeah,
really fast.
like this guy got straight up arrested, like, we told you you're not allowed to do this, and here you did it. So he's literally, he'll never be a doctor again. He's in prison, like there's all sorts of, because all these variables you're bringing up, who knows? Who knows what we're doing to the next generation, the following generation, so.
A good question is, I think the question is like, if you're changing just the physical characteristics in them, or you're also changing the reproductive, I don't really know the
Right.
answer. I'm sure.
If you're getting
out
to
there.
it that young, wouldn't everything like?
That's what I would assume.
Yeah.
That's the assumption, but again, how do we figure that out? Landry, do you have a question?
Yes.
Mhm.
What would be your opinion on gene therapy and gene replacement?
So, as in like, just like, because this is gene replacement right here, when they're taking out a certain gene and then they're putting in their,
Well, you are talking about gene editing. I was just
Okay.
curious what your thoughts are about gene
oh, like full gene
therapy.
replacement?
Gene therapy.
What do you mean by gene therapy?
Just the different, because those are different, but I was just curious because they're in some ways like gene replacement
Mhm.
is in some ways the same, but it's not that full same.
I guess I'm a little bit. I think, like, are you saying gene replacement, like, in an actual, like, human? Like, can they do that, or is that,
It's just one gene though, so it's more for diseases, but it is pretty much the same process as that, but it would be for specifically like a disease that only has one cell
okay.
doing it, but it is in the same practice.
I think, are you talking about like when you use plasma, like somebody who take out and you put healthy plasma, like with like cancer treatments and stuff like that?
Cancer treatment would be for gene editing, is for use for
So
cancer.
did you do some of that with adults? Like,
It's-
people who are currently living, where they do replace, like, I just know like cancer treatments, bone marrow transplants fall within that. So those
Oh
are.
my god, gene therapy is a one for one gene. Gene replacement is when they can't produce a certain gene,
Mhm.
but it's all kind of in the same realm. If you're saying people don't want to have gene editing
Mhm.
legal here, the other two fall somewhat in the same realm. So I was just curious, since
Yeah.
you're not for this, what
Right.
your opinion is.
Well, gene therapy is like that's a separate sort of thing that is legal in the United States, and they do that for genes that aren't working, such as all kinds of. I know specifically ducts, like lymphatic nodes. They have like ducts that release fluid, and so if that's not working, then they can do gene therapy or like. I think it's gene therapy. I believe it's gene therapy
Yeah.
because it's in a human. That they switch it out to make genes that create those ducts to be able to stop the fluid. So, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I mean, as long as it's helping them, and because I think it'd be hard to, if someone's already matured and you're switching out their genes. I don't know.
So let me throw in something. It seems like, and I haven't researched it as much. It seems like the CRISPR technology is changing. We're talking about the fundamental, like the genetic code of who this person is. That's what this CRISPR technology. Like we're literally copying and pasting, cutting, editing these people's genes. Gene therapy is introducing something to someone that wasn't there prior to.
Yeah.
And there seems a little difference in like, that's like medicine, right?
Yeah.
Like I got a headache, so I'm introducing something to my system that's supposed to solve that problem, right? So it seems like there's a lot less of an ethical dilemma because we're not fundamentally changing who this person is. We're introducing something into them that will hopefully help the problem that exists.
Yeah, 'cause I don't think you're gonna be able to do gene therapy and switch like their foot size or anything. Like I don't think
This
that's.
could fall into medicine as well with gene editing.
Mhm.
Because it is, I mean, to get that, you're going to have to go through insurance and approval of doctors. And it's very unlikely that people will be able to get it to edit, just for appearances versus disease.
Mhm.
And I was just curious for that because if you're, against it and people don't want it
Mhm.
legalized here, but in other places, there are places that do have it legalized, they have been only
Gene therapy or
using it, gene editing, using it for certain diseases. And as far as
like in the future.
like other places that have it legalized and can work on it and study it have only been using it for certain diseases
Mhm.
versus appearances, and again with insurance. And I was just curious that the likelihood of people using it for appearances versus diseases.
I would think at the beginning it would definitely be more disease focused, and they wouldn't want to do that type of therapy unless it's absolutely needed. The only case that it was AIDS in China, and that was he's thrown in jail, can't be a doctor like Mr. Satterfield, and that was in my paper. So I think that time will come, but I would assume they'd be very strict on the regulations. Yeah. Laura?
So within this, do you think there's an application of it, because everything can be applied poorly.
Yeah.
Do you think there's an application of it that within, like, you know, all these genetic tests you can do when they're very young, like when they're still developing, that if they'll have this certain like mental disability and all of that, do you think gene editing and CRISPR and all of that could cause less abortions in the people that are aborting babies because they don't like eugenics? Do you think it could help curb those effects, or do you think that's not an application?
So would they not be getting the abortion because of, like, you'd say, some sort of disease or something like that?
It's like, oh, I would abort, like, I personally would, but they would abort the baby because they had, like, we talked about it in Iceland, it was,
Down syndrome?
it wasn't Down syndrome, it was
Yeah, it
cerebral
was.
palsy.
Oh, cerebral palsy,
It
yeah.
was cerebral palsy.
Down syndrome. Whatever, we know what you're talking about.
So cerebral palsy. So if they could edit that out of that individual and that
Yeah.
individual could still be born, what would you say those like?
I think that's a really tough topic. I think that people, I mean, if you're saying that, oh yeah, well, my child's gonna have autism, yeah, like, they should die. Like, that's really hard, and that's a really tough topic, and I think that's, messed up. I don't think that's what people are all saying when they say that, but, I think if they're saying, well, if that's changed, then I don't think that's your right, but, like, I don't think that's the person's to, that's a really tough topic. I don't believe in, like, abortion. Like, I don't think that's right, personally. So, I don't think abortion is ever the case. That's not what you're saying, but, yeah, I don't, that's a tough
It's
topic.
really
I mean, people will have to decide for themselves, but I think this type of therapy, like gene editing, yeah, I can use to eradicate disease, and of course you'd want to do that, but I would say that you shouldn't abort if it's not going to work, or you can't do that.
So this is why these topics become so ethically charged really quickly, because this is beyond science. This is beyond, like, what can we do with medicine to, should we be doing this stuff at all? But it goes back to the fundamental point, is that there's the assumption here that the quality of life of a person is what determines whether or not they should be living. And that's what I hope we've solved a long time ago, that the quality of a person's life is not what merits their life being worth living.
And I agree with that. I'm just saying I've heard, like.
No, I get the question. It's
Yes.
just like, but that's the good thing underlying this exchange, is like making sure we remember that. Next question.
Well,
I think Will was up. Yeah.
So, like, how would you compare this, like, earlier you were talking about, like, you thought it was gonna be good for, like, a good while. But, like,
For, what do you mean? Like genetic editing in the
yeah,
beginning
if
stages?
it were to come out, you thought it was gonna be good
Mhm.
for a while, but we still thought about the same thing about, like, gene therapy. Because now you have hormone replacement therapy, and that's, like, changing the natural structure of your body to a different human.
So you're saying, well, my point is that, humans can't be left to, like, their own ideas and things like that. So if we're saying, yeah, I'm sure right when gene editing happens, for who knows how long, a lot of years, they'd have very strict regulations, but then they'd, like what we were talking about earlier, my big feet are a disease, so I need to get that changed, like, and then it just keeps going kind of downhill. That's where I would say. Is that what you were asking? Or?
Nova's been waiting for a while.
Sorry.
So I heard that they're using this like for military purposes in some places to make like super soldiers. Is that true? And what are your thoughts?
I haven't heard any of that, so I'm not gonna talk about that.
Okay, I'd like to contend your point that gene editing would not bring happiness. I have depression, and it's specifically genetic. You can trace it back at least three different generations.
Mhm.
If I did not have that, I would statistically, and much of my family would be happier. And since it's most likely genetic, I think that would be able to be edited out. So it's like, how would you respond to my desire for my children not to have depression?
So I would say I'll show you my slide. Well, it just says human happiness. So my point in the human happiness slide was that you can't change it by like, I guess I was more talking about physical alterations and like changing like, oh yeah, man, I'm like, for me, I'm like 5'10". I want to be like 6'2", but like that's not, once I'm finally 6'2", that's not gonna like alleviate all of my like problems and that I want.
You're right,
So
but
I get that, and yes, they're like disease, like taking away AIDS, or taking away the possibility of cancer, or taking away your genetic depression. That's definitely a great thing, and that's why I put that in the positive slide. I guess. Sorry, I don't know if I conveyed this point good enough, but
I mean, in general, but like, okay, so your argument is that due to the fact that this inherently is a person and it is done without their consent, it is amoral. What about braces? I didn't choose to put on braces.
I think that's a little bit different than
My
carrying with you
my
forever.
family has put metal into my mouth, and that I'm happy with. I'm glad they did.
Mhm.
But that was done without my consent. Isn't it that somewhat comparable to genetic disposition, where it's like specifically curing a disease or making a person stronger? I would be very much happy if I was genetically predisposed to be stronger. Similar to how, and it wouldn't cure my existential crises, but it would make it a lot easier for me to actually adjust. Similar to how putting braces into my mouth made it a lot easier for me to actually eat and to smile.
I agree. I think that we don't know the implications of genetic editing. So let's say your parents say, "Oh yeah, I want to make you stronger." Well, yeah, okay, if that works, that's great. Things like that. But if it doesn't work, got to think about that. Braces doesn't have that type of implication.
It's not as generally effective.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, we don't know. We're not confident in genetic editing yet. I had another thing to say that. I can't think of it.
It's just we're not confident. But
Right. If it's always good and there's always good side effects to that, then yeah. But also, if you have a good side effect, like let's say my mom has blonde hair and has blue eyes, same thing.
Then
If I don't look anything like my parents, but yeah, it is a good thing. I'm taller, all this kind of stuff. But I don't look like them. Me personally, I'd someday I don't look like my parents. Like, it's just not gonna cure. I don't know. You can put all types of loopholes, stuff like that, but I don't think overall it's gonna.
Do you want research on this to continue, or do you want this to be shut down immediately, or do you want this just to be research continue but with ethical constraints?
So yeah, my main topic is that I don't think it'd be good for humanity because of all the negative implications that it might have. But I agree, like, there's positives. Eliminating diseases, I think that's great. I think gene therapy is great. We're just going to have to see where it goes.
So you don't, so you
But
have-
I'm against it.
Sorry, let's move on to another
Sorry,
question.
sorry.
Go ahead, Landry.
I don't know exactly what you said earlier about when you were doing the biblical application with how people, it was about more changing people, even like with diseases and stuff, and how that's different. I can't remember exactly what you were saying, really different from what God wants or plan. I can't exactly remember what you said, but about that, it's for people who do have like a chronic disease where it's, there's no cure for it and they have it, and they do if there is a way to either change it or eradicate it, would that be, they're changing something that they would have forever, that, God gave them, what would be, like, opinion or?
Yeah, well, my argue, like, what I told about my mom, that, like, God's got a plan for things like that. I put the other, like, eliminating disease, that's a positive. My argument is that the negatives are outweighing the positives. So, if that answers your question.
Yeah, and that kind of underlies both these questions, is that the difficulty with specifically CRISPR technology, this like cutting edge stuff, right? The difficulty with gene editing and any type of medical procedure that cuts to the fundamental personhood of in order for this to even happen, we got to make sure that this is so early in development that this is going to change every subsequential development from this person. Cole's example of braces before he was able to choose it, well, you were a child, and our level of certainty as to what braces do to the alignment of your teeth is the cost to benefit ratio. Sorry, Mrs. Bowersoft, I just used the economics thing. The cost to benefit ratio, like we are so confident in this treatment being successful that whatever cost it may be is totally worth it. What Isaac's arguing and what we're recognizing with this level of in-depthness of this procedure, this isn't just sticking a piece of metal in someone's mouth and it may or may not, let's say it doesn't work, oh well. You know, if it does work, even better. If this stuff fails, we might not have a viable human being on our hand anymore. You follow me? Like,
Or
like
for
this-
generations, like.
In this discussion, we're assuming somewhat that this process would work and
Right.
Right.
fixing
Yeah,
things.
both
And
of
it's-
those questions
we just
assume
don't
the
have
success.
Exactly.
history or the study to show that this would actually happen in reality.
And I think that's what, like, Isaac, forget, I don't mean to put words in your mouth. Like, anybody who looks at this, if it's able to do what they want it to do, awesome. But we're so unsure, we're so early on this of whether or not it's able to do what we think it's going to do. And there's the law of unintended consequences, right?
Yeah.
Like, who knows, we don't even know the problems that it may cause. Good job, Isaac.